This audio podcast is available on YouTube, iTunes and Google Play, or you can download and listen to an MP3 audio file from my website or add the RSS feed to your podcast player. If you're listening to the podcast on iTunes, I would appreciate a rating and a review. And on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell icon. If you enjoy an episode, a like is always welcome, as are any comments or questions you may have, which you can add in the comment section below each episode. And before we begin with this episode, a quick note on the quality of the audio, should someone be wondering. The interview was recorded on a weekend when Paul took a laptop to a quiet corner of his home so that we could start recording. And I didn't wish to trouble Paul even further by requesting that we look into audio setups. It was nevertheless a great chat with Paul, and which I hope you'll enjoy. Thank you.
Cheers. Although, if people don't like, they're going straight down into Davy Jones's locker, so they better click the like button.
Hello and welcome to the Sim Racing Perspectives podcast for Sunday the 7th of October 2018. I'm delighted to have Paul Coleman on the show. Paul is well known to many Dirt Rally fans as the chief designer of Dirt Rally 1.0. Paul Coleman and Dirt Rally 1.0 is one of the main reasons I bought my first driving wheel, and which later led to the creation of this podcast, etc. I recall visiting a store one day and taking a photo of a Scalextric rally car, and I don't recall what it was, but I tweeted at Paul a picture of the car, and Paul had replied with an image of a Scalextric Rally Legend collector pack that he had received as a Christmas gift. I think it was a 2-pack including a Delta S4 and something else, perhaps a Quattro, but I remember the name of Stig Blomqvist being mentioned. So what was it, Paul, at the time? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was that, I think it was a Monte Carlo edition, Scalextric double pack, definitely a Delta S4 and the Quattro. I couldn't tell you who the drivers were, but the person who bought it for me was actually Jon Tucker, who helped with the development of Dirt Rally 1 and was the rally driver in the car that I co-drove in. So that was his Christmas gift to me that year. Well, to me and my son, I think he aimed it at, so that it was like when Sterling was old enough, we'd be able to play together, and obviously fight over who gets the Delta and who gets the Quad.
I remember John's name, and Paul, forgive me, I'm jumping ahead of myself. First of all, welcome to the show, and thank you very much for joining.
No, thank you for having me on. It's good to be back talking about sim racing. It feels like a long time since
we were kind of talking back and forth, and my interest in Dirt Rally was kind of my start in this hobby after Dirt 3, and I would tweet at you every now and then we would talk on Twitter and so on, and it's lovely to be able to actually talk to you today. And with the announcement of Dirt Rally 2.0, I reached out to you, and then I said, well, I realized then after that you've moved on since, but I said I still wanted to talk to you, so here we are today. So Paul, one of the questions I had was, can you tell us, and I know you've perhaps talked about this before on the Absolute Rally podcast and so on, but can you tell us, how did you get into racing and rally games, and how did you get started at Codemasters?
So I've always been a petrol head. I think my first word was car. I wanted to be a car designer when I was growing up. That was the answer to the question if anybody asked me what I was going to do when I grew up. I did all of my school and education around becoming a car designer, and then later on an engineer, actually.
Oh, really?
And then I went to university to study automotive engineering at Coventry. But I think I'd been kind of lying to myself about my capabilities in mathematics, and I think it's fine when you're at school and you're being pushed to pass exams and you're doing what you need to do to sort of jump each of those hurdles. But when you get to university, it's a very different way of learning. It's very much on you to drive yourself forward, and without having kind of the teacher standing over me with a stick telling me that what I needed to do to get through the next bit. I kind of, my motivation waned, and I think it shone a light on how much I'd been kidding myself about my own mathematical ability. So I started to flounder. I ended up crashing out of the course about 9 months after I started it. And I kind of started to lose my way a little bit. But while I was at university, I played many computer games, but probably the one that sticks with me the most is Colin McRae Rally, because that was one of the first games that I played on the PC. It actually led to me buying my first PC for the release of Colin McRae Rally 2. And at the time with Colin McRae 1, it was myself and a couple of friends would just take it in turns to drive stages. So we'd kind of share the load, but it was kind of pass the pad multiplayer.
Yeah.
Because we were all students, we couldn't afford a separate PC each, so we kind of split the load between us. But it was the first game that really showed Rally to me in a virtual world at a level which I could truly appreciate it. I had played Sega Rally in the arcades, and I did love it, but that was in the arcades, and you couldn't necessarily bring an arcade cabinet home with you. And
unfortunately, not no.
No.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot else touched that feeling at that level until McRae Rally came along. Now, prior to that, I guess my interest in rally started very young. My father had a Lancia Delta, and he used to go to the Lancia dealership and get like loads and loads of brochures and posters and stuff. So my bedroom wall was kind of all Martini racing Lancias.
Yes.
From the 80s era. Actually, I was probably more of a Formula One fan from about the age of 7 to probably 12, 13. And then in 1994, I remember watching Senna have his fatal crash at Imola.
Yes.
And he was such a big hero of mine that it really affected me. And it was at a point where I guess at 13 going 14, you're pretty susceptible to that kind of thing. And I just completely fell out of love with Formula One. I couldn't watch it anymore. But at that same time, rallying was really starting to take hold in the UK. I know that it had been a popular sport through the Group B era, but just the fact that McRae was there and starting to challenge at a world championship level, it was just a perfect kind of transition from Formula One, which I'd fallen out of love with, to rally, which was exciting and dangerous. And the way it was televised back then on TV was a much more digestible format that I think today's media has managed with WRC, because it's just such a vast sport in terms of the logistics of getting to an event and covering everything. That I think they still struggle to sort of make a digestible format. But yeah, so I got into rally. I sort of formalized that rally enjoyment through Colin McRae. It led me to change my direction in terms of the university course that I was doing, with a view to getting into games and hopefully with a chance to work on such a franchise. And then when I graduated, I think it was in 2003, that summer I started applying for jobs at Codemasters. There was nothing. And then by September, my parents were like, okay, so when are you going to get a real job, kind of thing? And then luckily one role came up that was for games testing.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, you know what, it might not be the job that I was hoping to get. I was hoping to get something in like menu design, user experience design, that kind of thing, although the model didn't really officially exist then. but I ended up starting as a tester. That I think it was November when the job actually started, and I was testing Tucker Race Driver 2 as my first proper gig. But then by that next summer, I was getting ready to test Coleman 2005, so I kind of arrived and found my feet, and eventually got to work on the franchise that I'd always set out to work on.
That must have been enjoyable, that the fact that you had actually fell in love with rally in a way on the digital format by playing Colin McRae, and then got to work on the actual game.
Yeah. I mean, it's great to have a focused goal, and to actually be able to achieve it. You know, you can take that for granted, but it's an incredibly rare thing for people who have dreams to actually see those dreams through. So I'm entirely appreciative of the fact that I got to do what I set out to do. That's not to say that it didn't involve a whole heap of hard work and, you know, extra hours and, you know, being in the right place at the right time as well, but also delivering when it was asked of me. But, you know, fundamentally it was, it made life a whole lot easier, being able to put extra effort into something that you love rather than putting extra effort into something that you don't particularly enjoy. So yeah, I guess it was a great opportunity that I took with both hands, and it kind of grew from there.
And then about your college graduation, so you said that you weren't so big on the mathematics, which I'm not either, I have to admit. So did you then change your majors? And when you graduated, what did you graduate as, if I might ask? Because you obviously you were trying to figure it out as you went along, as many people do. But when you came out, then what were your major subjects once you graduated in 2003?
Yeah, so it was. So I spent 5 years at university.
Yep.
My first year was doing automotive engineering, which I stopped doing. I then changed to a course called Development and Health in Disaster Management, and it was essentially setting up refugee camps in natural disaster affected areas, and kind of getting on top of disease control, making sure that the people who have fled whatever circumstances they were in were able to survive within makeshift accommodation.
Yeah.
And on paper, it sounded like the most amazing thing. And my father worked in the United Nations, and I saw it as a way of kind of almost following in his footsteps and helping out with people less fortunate. However, the reality of that course was very different to the kind of sales pitch that they gave on paper. So I ended up dropping out of that course as well. And then I found a course which is called Communication Authoring and Design, which is kind of graphic design, but with a bit more written word in it. So the kind of perfect job that you would have got from doing that course would have been writing instruction manuals for like Hewlett-Packard printers or whatever.
Yes.
That wasn't the thing that excited me the most, but it was something that I could definitely do. I did have pretty decent written English, and I had an eye for design because a lot of the subjects that I'd studied on the path to becoming an automotive engineer had design technology and all of that kind of stuff. So the process of design I'd kind of had instilled in me from a very early age. So yeah, it was a course that partly it worked well for me. It also gave me that sort of window into maybe I can get into doing this in games through user interface design, user experience design. But then the reality of it was a course that I knew I could get a degree in. I knew I could pass.
Yes.
And that would resolve the concern I had of disappointing my parents, who put me through university for 5 years. To walk away with nothing would have been probably a disappointment beyond belief for everyone concerned. So yeah, it was just a way of actually getting that certificate to hang on the wall kind of thing. But it has served me well. It's I don't want to undermine the value of the course. It has served me well for sure.
Yeah. And not a lot, and in a way, inadvertently, it got you along the path that you kind of wanted to go, in a way, because it was touching on the topics that you were intrinsically kind of interested in anyway. So
absolutely, yeah. Without doing some of the things I did in that course, there are certainly points in my working life where I would have not been as well informed as I had been because of that course. So there was definitely aspects of it that helped. But it certainly wasn't a course about video games.
No,
which I know you get there.
no. Touched on some of the elements. Now, as many will recall, Dirt Rally 1.0 first released in Steam Early Access, and over time added more cars and tracks as well as rallycross, and later also virtual reality. And overall, I would say that Dirt Rally 1.0 set the standard for rally games. I recall the early days of the first Dirt Rally show, which is now back for 2.0, with you, Paul, and Lee Williams. And Lee is now the international manager of community management at EA. A shout out to Lee. And during the dirt shows, you'd be there with people standing around in the background. And I remember Lee would always say something like, "Oh, you lot get back to work," you know. I used to enjoy that. I used to enjoy that a lot. And then I remember a story of you, Paul and Lee, travelling to experience a rallycross event in Sweden, and how much of a real eye-opener it was. I think you were discussed it during one of the original dirt shows. And the Steam Early Access period for Dirt Rally 1.0 was a real eye-opener for me, because I was following the features as they were added and watching the dirt shows, and every now and then annoying you, Paul, on Twitter, and you were always so gracious in replying in some way if you could. So Paul, could you, I think our listeners would like to hear it, so could you tell the story of how Dirt Rally 1.0 came to be following your work on Colin McRae and perhaps also the Dirt series? Like, where did the origin of Dirt Rally 1.0 come from, the selection of cars and so on?
So it probably started after Dirt 3. So back in May 2011, we kind of made Dirt 3, and we knew it was a great success, and we really enjoyed doing all of the Gymkhana and party mode stuff. It felt like a great game, a great package. One thing we'd done with Dirt 3 was to try and represent the sport of rally in a bit more authenticity, just in terms of the car selection. But I don't think we stacked up in terms of the tracks and how they flowed and the widths and the style of racing that we were representing. It was definitely a very lightweight take, while albeit graphically incredible, but the stages themselves were designed in a way that people could pick up and play. They didn't really need to listen to the co-driver in any great detail. But as a result, it set my mind thinking about how we could actually take a step towards something more authentic with the Dirt franchise. So the seeds of that started to be sown then. The reality of it was that at the same time, or towards the end of Dirt 3, I actually started speaking again on Twitter with a guy called Jon Tucker, who had rallied back in the day. He'd actually, I think he came runner-up to Chris Meek in a Peugeot scholarship competition. And then went off and did the Peugeot, I think 206 Super Cup Championship, and pretty much bankrupted himself doing that just by doing rally, because rally's incredibly expensive.
Yes,
for the gains you can get from it. But anyway, he could certainly pedal, and he'd got back into being interested in rallying because he'd been involved in some of the focus testing that we were doing for Dirt 3. And he was chatting away with me on Twitter, and then he decided, he'd had both of his sons by that point, and I think he decided that he wanted to get back into rallying. But his old co-driver had gone off to do some rally driving of his own, and so he approached me from the perspective of, I need a co-driver, but also I think it would be a really good opportunity for you to get to experience rally firsthand.
Yeah.
Because that will actually show you what you can do to make the game better, and how there are some really obvious things that you don't do that you should do. So I was like, okay, that's cool. Asked my wife if she was okay, or she was actually my fiance at the time, but whether she was cool with the notion of me jumping in a rally car. And she was. So without much more thought, we set about getting a car prepped, and we did some 12-car navigation rallies. And then by August of that year, I was sat in a rally car with Jon, doing the Neath Valley stages. And he was absolutely right. You know, all of that experience leading up to it, and then the actual experience of jumping in the car, made like it crystallized a lot of those thoughts that I'd been having about how do we make this a more authentic experience? How do I bring dirt back to being in the same spirit of the original Colin McRae games? Which, jumping ahead a little bit, I remember being handed the original Colin McRae rally design document and almost putting it side by side with the Dirt Rally design document that we had, and the things we spoke about and the approach it was taking was virtually identical. It was, you know, it was boiled down to a very simple vision, which is, let's just make the best rally game ever made. That was all it needed to say in it, really. And so every decision we made along the way was always, did it answer that question? Is this going to make this the best rally game ever made? And if it didn't, chances are it got dropped from the list of things we were doing. So every single little minute detail we were putting in was always to that aim. And it was very, very similar to the approach that they took with the original Colin McRae rally, albeit the way that they simulated the cars was, you know, very basic comparatively. But what they did, which is very much the same approach that we took, was to not get too caught up in the numbers and think much more in terms of the feeling and trying to capture the way that the cars felt as they drove down the stage. And there's a bit of a sort of magic medicine, like George's Marvelous Medicine. I don't know if you've read that book, but it's one of the Roald Dahl books, and basically they create this magic, and they don't really know what ingredients they've got in there, but they then try and make that potion again later on, and they can't do it.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, when you do make something like Dirt Rally 1, going back and trying to recapture that feeling after things have advanced and things have changed and things have developed is actually one of the hardest things I've ever done in my career.
That's interesting.
So yeah, it's because we didn't really have, there wasn't a clear-cut mathematical formula that we could apply. It kind of led to it being a very challenging thing to recapture. But yeah, the feeling was what we focused on, and I think that's why it shone through as being so special, because you know, the way that the cars felt, the dynamics that they had, while perhaps not entirely grounded in simulation, they definitely captured that sense of driving a car too quickly down a road that's too narrow and shouldn't really be driven on anywhere near the speeds that rally drivers do drive on them.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where it all started back in Dirt 3. Obviously, we ended up making Dirt Showdown first.
Yes. Oh yeah, that's right. I've forgotten about that actually. Yeah.
And that's, you know, that was just a necessity that the business needed a game quickly, to give the company more room to make Grid 2. So we essentially released Dirt Showdown in order to give the other team a chance to develop out Grid 2 for a bit longer. But the reality of that is we were sharing a lot of resources. So actually, it didn't give them a year of extra development. And it definitely took its toll on the team in terms of the amount of extra effort that was required.
Yeah.
But then Grid 2 was worked on for another year. And while that was being worked on, we broke ground on what the next Dirt game was going to be after Showdown. And that was absolutely what we wanted to Dirt to be, whether it was going to be Dirt 4, whether it was going to be called Dirt, and just we'd kind of like not put a number behind it. We didn't know, but we knew that we'd take a much more serious approach to rallying than we ever had done with certainly the Dirt part of the franchise. But the team that we had was apart from myself and a couple of other members of the dev team, most of the team were new to the studio and to their roles, because the aim was to try and get two teams working on the two franchises individually, and it was working really well, because things that I wouldn't have been able to ask a team who'd already worked on Dirt, I was able to ask these new and fresh guys, and they were able to answer things in a different way, because they hadn't experienced the challenges and the pitfalls we'd had from making Dirt before. So it meant that there was a lot of creative thinking and new solutions to the problems that we faced. And it felt like a really special time, because we were prototyping new handling that was originally built on the old engine, and we sort of pushed it as far as it could go, but we started to hit brick walls. So then we actually ended up finding a new simulation programmer who was willing to sort of crack open the old black box of our old Ego simulation engine and start rebuilding it from the ground up. And it was, this combination of challenging the status quo, approaching things from a different angle, and having a lot of time to prototype that core feeling that kind of led us to having this great feeling prototype. But at the same time, Cody's it went through quite a tough time. The games across the company were not doing as well as they needed to do. We'd kind of missed the boat on the new consoles, so we were behind in terms of where we needed to be in terms of having fresh new games on the new consoles ready to go to market. So we were in a really difficult place, and the business needed to reduce headcount to survive, and that resulted in our team being pretty drastically reduced in size, because we were the non-active project, basically. I think that was the logic that was applied. And so I was left with basically myself and a couple of other guys who'd worked on Dirt Rally and this prototype, and nothing really to show for it other than that. So it was a really difficult time. Like, it really made me question whether I wanted to continue in games at all, because
I'm sure.
This one felt like a really special project that we were working on, and the people that were working on it were amazing, still friends of mine to this day. But yeah, like, circumstances kind of started to turn slowly at first, but eventually it started to snowball in the favor of, this prototype, it might be really super hard and super simulation, which is not what the business would want from a Dirt game, but we should probably put it out there and give it a go and just see whether there is an appetite for it. So that was when the decision came to finish off what we had, to make enough cars and tracks to justify releasing it as an early access product, and then to build on it as the months went on, and take this very different approach of actually listening to what the community wanted, actually giving them regular monthly builds, providing them with a roadmap of content that we could give them, and going through early access, which was at the time actually the only way that we could have released a game. I don't think putting Dirt Rally direct onto console and PC would have been viable, because
no, because you were still working on it actively, basically. And
the
interesting
to take it through to a finished product would have been too high a risk to actually see through. So it was kind of a perfect storm from quite challenging beginnings, and I mean, the rest is history, I suppose you could say. It was probably the most exciting period of game development I've ever had. Once we actually pushed the button and said, here's this game, we think you'll like it. Oh, by the way, it's ready for you to play now, so you can just go away and download it on Steam.
I remember. I was one of the day one guys. I remember, and there was no fanfare, no long. It just appeared, and everybody was like, "What is this?" And it went from there. Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Well, I think, looking back on it, it was the only thing we could have done.
Yeah.
Because if we as Codemasters had gone out there and said, "Here's Dirt Rally. It'll be available in 6 months' time, but it's going to be serious simulation, and you're just going to have to wait to try it." I think that would have given people enough time to sharpen their pitchforks to say, why isn't it on console? Why isn't it a full game? All of those things will have started to snowball and work against it. Whereas that opportunity to just pick it up and play it, and it was just like, you know what? We're not going to sell this to you with marketing and PR. Just try it. If you like it, tell your friends about it. It's the least you can do. And we just sort of watched it snowball from there. The people who picked up Dirt Rally on day one got a very good deal in the end.
Yeah, we did.
Because, for the 20 quid, I think it was, maybe 16 quid, I think it was.
Something like that, yeah. That's right, yeah.
You ended up with pretty much a year and a half's worth of content and support. it was, it was exciting coming in the morning, having chatted to people on Twitter and hearing what they liked and what they didn't like, and working out how we could sort of change the things that we were working on to better support the desires of the people who were playing the game. It was something that I loved, and it was something that I wish I'd been able to continue to do with every game I've worked on since, because service-led games, reacting to what the community want, helping shape the game around how it's being played, it's far more in tune with how a lot of other apps and online games are being developed. And the whole put it on a disc and fire it off into orbit style of game development, it's quite old school now when you think about it, and it's much nicer to be able to kind of mold and shape something organically over its lifespan. So it was a great time, and one that I loved a great deal. It felt at times like I was kind of selling Dirt Rally out of a briefcase whenever we were around and trying to get people to play it. But it's definitely, when you passionately believe in something, you do. It's so much easier to go that extra mile and see things through. So yeah, I guess that's the story behind it. And it's not, maybe one day I'll write a book about it, but it certainly wasn't the perfect story. But then, I think of when I watch documentaries on how some of the greatest albums in the world got made, and you hear of the sort of heartache and the turmoil that the artists go through to get to the point where, as a consumer, you just hear the music and you're like, this is a rocking album, but you never get to see the blood, sweat and tears that happened in the background to make a reality. And there was a lot of that on Dirt Rally, and it always felt, even once we got it out there, it always felt like it could have been so much more. But that is what it is. You have to make the best of the cards that you're dealt sometimes, and that's what I believe we did. And I think it was great to see the community appreciate it and play it as much as they did.
Yeah. And I guess I have a video on my channel about the Carroll Shelby and the Shelby Daytona. And one of the reasons I created it was because the Shelby Cobra, and then the Daytona. The Shelby Daytona came about because Peter Brock had an idea and he wanted to work on it. And Carroll Shelby let him have the crashed chassis of a AC Cobra, and he left it over in the corner of the garage. And after the 9 to 5, the guys in the shop would come along and help him, and then when when Ken Miles originally took the car out, the car performed really well, but they were literally kind of making it up as they went along, and that for me was a fascinating story. So did Jon Tucker, was Jon actually playing the Richard Burns Rally or Dirt Games? When Jon asked you to join him as a co-driver, had he an idea of teaching you or allowing you to experience rally so as to input into the games, or what, where was he coming from in that way?
So he was an avid rally game player. He played pretty much every rally game under the sun.
Yeah.
At that point, and he could certainly drive racing games quickly as well. So he had that connection. He'd never worked in games before, but he saw it as a great way of essentially helping me understand the sport that we were representing firsthand. And I guess that's where co-driving actually was such an amazing opportunity, because it allowed me to essentially parachute in at a national level alongside somebody that really could drive, and get to experience the time controls, the road sections, what it actually felt to be thrown around in an Impreza driving at breakneck speeds through a forest that had been torn up by 150 other rally cars.
It must have been scary in the beginning, or...
So the cool thing about Jon is he was like the best mentor when it came to this stuff. He helped me understand my role, what I needed to do. But my character trait, I fit much better into team sports than I do solo sports. I'm a terrible golfer. I love playing football. As goalkeeper, I can command the defense and ensure that we know what we're doing, and winning together as a team is amazing. The cool thing for rally for me was that it is still a team sport, but it's one that's like really boils down team to just two people. And at that point, there's nowhere to hide. If the co-driver's not doing what they're supposed to do, the driver can't drive fast enough. It's not so much that the driver's going to crash. They'll just lose confidence and they won't drive down the stage as fast as they need to.
Yeah.
So that symbiotic relationship of I deliver the notes well, he drives more confidently, I feel that he's driving quicker and more confidently, and I then deliver the notes even better. And it's just kind of snowballs from there. It was like something I'd never experienced. In terms of being scared, no, you don't really have time to think about the ridiculousness of the situation that you're in.
Yeah.
And you just get on with it. There's too much to think about to worry about being scared. I think if you were on a passenger ride in a rally car and you weren't having to spit the notes out and you were just there watching the trees rip past, then it probably would be a bit scarier. But the fact that your role is as important and you're busy doing it, there's just no time to worry about that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely was tough because I'm horribly car sick if I'm not driving. When we did the 12
that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so when we did the 12-car navigation rallies, I had to basically train myself to not be car sick anymore.
Yeah.
Although the first couple of rallies we did were pretty messy, because actually in the world of co-driving, I'd say that sort of navigation run is way more challenging on the co-driver than the driver, because you're kind of reading a map through a magnifying glass with a lamp on it for an hour solid, just staring at the map. And the car doesn't have bucket seats, so you're just kind of getting thrown around all over the place, and it's pretty intense. Whereas at least with stage rally, it's like 12, 16 miles maximum, certainly in a national level. And then you pretty much can have a bit of a relaxed unwind through the road section where really all you're doing is map reading, but with zero intensity because you're driving at 40 miles an hour for the most part. So yeah, it certainly wasn't scary. It was intense. But yeah, absolutely one of the most exciting things I've ever done in my life, and something I look forward to doing again and again and again. And not sure when our next event is going to be, but we do intend to keep doing it, because it doesn't matter whether I'm out here in Serbia working on mobile games or whether I'm working on dirt. That's not going to stop me from wanting to be a co-driver.
No. And how long did it take you to get up to speed with Pacenotes? Was it Jon that was teaching you, or did you come up with your own system, or had you known about the concept of co-driver Pacenotes before you started with Jon? Or
so I'd known about the concept through working on the games. We obviously needed to make sure that the Pacenotes were accurate, but we didn't really have the sensibility of how they got written. We used to employ co-drivers to come in and essentially recce and write the notes for us.
Yeah.
Jon taught me about the pacing, and probably the best thing that he explained to me was the fact that a driver's brain is kind of like, it has 3 slots of information available, and as you drive through the stage, you're feeding those slots with corners, and when you've a corner that is the 3rd one in the slot, you can then put the next one in, so it kind of works a bit like a carousel.
Yes.
So then the timing just becomes a case of, when you're going through the quick stuff, you need to get the calls out quicker. When you're going through the slow stuff, you can, for example, when you're coming to a hairpin, you need to make sure that you've said the hairpin before the braking point. Then when you feel the car braking, that's when you can start giving the next call, because you know at that point they've acknowledged that the hairpin's coming up. You're hard on the brakes. You can feel it in the belts, and it's at that point where you can be doing the distance and then the next corner, so that the driver knows A, how hard they can accelerate out of the hairpin, and B, what the next corner is going to be and how quickly it's going to be coming up after it. So hairpins are probably the easier. They're hard on the way in, because you need to make sure that the call's there and ready for them, but it's very easy on the way out, and they're kind of like a full stop at the end of, not even a sentence, like a paragraph is where you get your hairpins. The most challenging, and it's what the really good top end co-drivers are amazing at, is being able to feel the movement of the car through the quick stuff, which is actually can be quite subtle at times, and they're spitting out, the really fast calls, and not even looking up from the notes, because they're just feeling how the car's moving, and they know where they are from how the car feels
based on the notes.
What really, so that's what really sets the good guys apart, because they're essentially, there is no time to look up.
No.
And even when you do look up, the road's going to kind of look straight and wiggly, so you just have to make sure that you can feel it. So they're the bits where I probably had my biggest struggles, but when I look back at videos in the early days, I used to call super early, and Jon would be sort of saying, okay, hang on a minute, or he needed, or tell me when he needed the next note calling. Later on, because later on I'd done more co-driving for in-game, and so I started to learn to call like the calls are delivered in the game, and that was actually too late for his liking. I needed to be calling them earlier than that, because real rally drivers, they tend to want their information sooner, so that they can paint the picture of the road ahead sooner.
Yes.
That, I think if I was going to do it again, I'd need to find that middle ground again. But it was an amazing experience. It took from about, he emailed me in February or March of 2011, and we were stage rallying in August. But prior to that, we'd done 2 or 3 12-car navigation rallies, which helped with the whole adhering to time controls and avoiding that sort of penalty from arriving either early or late to a time control. So yeah.
And I guess when you talked about the concept of co-driver just looking at his notes and feeling the ground and not looking at the horizon to get an idea of where he is, I guess from doing a recce of a stage, they'd also have a reasonable idea from the recce that they do, for example, to formulate the concepts behind the Pacenotes, to have a pretty much idea. So then it's a case of, you're then taking the same route again at higher speed and you have your notes, and then you're not looking. And that's fascinating. I didn't realize that. Like, if you see footage, you'll sometimes see the co-driver flick their head up, but most of the time they're not looking at the notes. And as you said, the really good ones, the most experienced ones, are just going off feel and the pace notes that they have on the paper in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, well, to clarify, you look when you can look, but if the time isn't available, then you've just got to go on the feeling. I know I've never recce'd a stage that I've competed on. I've always had the notes provided by a third party, because at a national level, to keep costs down, that's how they do it. Basically, you purchase a book that's written in the style that you want them.
Yeah.
And that comes with an optional safety DVD, they call it, which is a guy driving a Subaru Impreza at about 10 miles an hour through the stage. So you get to see what the road looked like 3 weeks before the rally, which is generally like every other forest track you've ever seen if you've gone for a walk with a dog or whatever. When you actually arrive on the stage in the heat of competition, the road will look nothing like it looked in that DVD, because it's been torn up. And it's not like a plowed field, but roads that had a line of grass down the middle don't have that line of grass anymore, because the undertray's scraped on it from every car that's gone through, and it's now just a gravel road. So there's stuff that you don't recognize from those videos. The pacing is obviously completely different, because 10 miles an hour solid speed through a course, doesn't matter how much you speed that up, you're not going to capture the pace difference that you get from driving a car quickly down the quick stuff and slowly through the hairpins. So I think the WRC guys who do recce the stages and do get to write their own notes, probably because they've studied the course in that much more detail and they've seen it firsthand, they will have more situational awareness than what we ever would have had. But it was still quite alien going into the stage compared to what it was like when you saw it on the DVD.
Yeah. And I remember, the development of Dirt Rally 1.0, wasn't it so that the engine, the Ego engine, you were using code that was based on the Ego engine used in Dirt 3, wasn't it so?
Yeah, well, I mean, we always talked about it as the iteration of the Ego engine, and that's because that's how it has and always has been. The first time I encountered that engine was on Race Driver 2, and although it would be almost unrecognizable today to what it was back then, the foundations of how things were built were still that same code base. So it's not like Codemasters just tear it all up and write a new engine every time they make a game. Formula 1 2015
had the new one, yes.
Yeah, so that is an example of where a new engine got written. There was still modules from the old engine in that, but fundamentally it was a different engine. And it was part of the strife that we suffered with during the prototype phase, was we never had any programmers available to us, because they were all, every time we got one, they were sort of tasked with helping out finishing off Ego 3, because the aim was that we were going to use it well. But over time, it became clear that it was an engine that was going to be fantastic for Formula 1 and not as useful for rally as we'd hoped it would be. So later on, we took the decision to just stick with what we've got and improve that, and that improvement continues to this day. So just the latest iteration of the same old engine that it always was, but it's unrecognizable to what it was because it's evolved so much.
Yeah. And the inclusion of rallycross later in Dirt Rally 1.0, how did that come about? And also, as a final point on Dirt Rally 1.0, how were you able to convince the management to allow you to use the early access process? Because as far as I can remember, it's one of the first driving games to be launching an early access, and indeed it may have been the precursor to what Kuno Simulazione have done with Assetto Corsa, and now with Assetto Corsa Competizione, launch on PC, get some feedback, see how we're going, and then released later on console. So how did the Rallycross come about? I assume it's elements of it were from your relationship with the content that's in Dirt 3. And how did you get permission then or how did you make it so that the management would let you release an early access? Because I guess it was a bit of a gamble in a way, wasn't it?
Yeah, so Rallycross is probably the easier question to answer. So after Dirt 3, we had obviously represented Rallycross in Dirt 1, 2, and 3. And at the time, Rallycross was still quite a clubman sport. There was a notion that it was going to kick off in America, but it never really did. And we were talking to independent drivers, and the only championship we were talking to was actually the British Rallycross Championship because of Liam Duran and Amy Duran. And then IMG signed a deal to take over the promotion of Rallycross as a sport. And when they did that, one of the first things they looked to do was to try and seek out how they could get it represented in a video game as a sort of tangible licensed sport, because one of the best ways of promoting a sport is to get a video game with your championship in there. So we discussed all through the prototype phase of Dirt Rally that we'd like to work with them. We went as far as building Liddon Hill and a bunch of cars, which we were able to prototype and show them. And they were very excited, but we didn't really have that big boxed product that they were hoping to have to show to their management and say, look, we're in a computer game already. Yeah. But they also wanted a significant amount of money, I seem to remember, for their license. But over time, we kind of negotiated around this point of we need, or we'd like to have Rallycross in our game, but we don't necessarily need it to be licensed. We've done it before, we can do it again. But we see great potential and opportunity in the world, or at the time, it became the World Rallycross Championship. But we saw great potential in that. And when we did first start talking, they presented their brand vision to us, and it fitted almost exactly with what our brand vision was for Dirt. Yeah. And so we just felt like we were a good partnership, but it was a case of just getting the business side of things to align. And what we ended up deciding to do was that we would get them into Dirt, and we would slowly build on the amount of content we had, with the view to eventually have the full championship in and running, so that we can represent the entire calendar. And that will come in probably the next couple of years, and we'll be at a point where, you know what, we can run an esports championship hand in hand with the World Championship and that kind of stuff. All of those things that become limitations because you haven't got all of the content will suddenly open up, and potential is there to do all of that stuff. So it's something that Formula One have done very successfully. Yes, and that's true. No reason why that can't continue with FIA World Rallycross. It's a wicked sport. I love all motorsports, but the format, how quick the events are, the door-to-door racing, the fact that drivers from very different backgrounds can all come together and take their driving styles and apply them in such different ways. You know, it's funny, it was quite naive of us, but when we first looked at Rallycross, we were like, oh, they're all hatchbacks, they're all four-wheel drive, they're all names, so apart from the model looking a bit different, pretty much we'll have this one in the bag. And then we started speaking to the Rallycross teams, and every single team had a different philosophy for how they set their car up, what differentials they used, how they laid out the engine, and each driver within the team then had a different way of driving as well. So each of those cars, even though on face value they look pretty much identical, under the hood they're all different in their own nuanced ways. And so that work that we thought, oh yeah, it would be easy, we'll just stick a load of the same car in. We actually ended up spending more time and effort trying to represent the nuances of those different rallycross cars, the different styles of differential, the fact that some of them don't even have a center diff, all of those things, and then making those cars competitive with one another. That created actually quite a sizable headache for us, where we thought we were going to have a bit of an easy ride with it.
Yeah.
I'm delighted that the relationship has continued, that it's growing, and that wherever it goes in the future will only be more positive, I think. So the other bit was, remind me what it was again,
Sorry, how did you get the approval from management to do the early access period? Because if I remember correctly, it was at least a first for Codemasters, and indeed a first for a sim racing game.
Yeah. There wasn't really any approval needed, because we were in a pretty tough situation as a company.
Yes.
And it was the only real way that we could get such a high risk prototype out into the public eye without spending so much money on it that it would have become non-viable because of the amount of money that had been spent. So it was a necessity. The positive was that the management we had at the time, and they're still the guys that run the business now, had the vision of actually, what, we should take this risk rather than not, and potentially letting the prototype just get archived and forgotten about. So, we did work a lot with Steam. We had a lot of meetings with them to make sure that the sort of thing that we were doing was right.
Yeah.
I think what we've done is set a difficult precedent for smaller studios who want to use early access, because we've kind of almost unfairly had the resources available to make our tracks and cars look amazing. So it has set a difficult precedent, but for me it was really important that we released with a game that looked great, because I didn't want people having their feedback about how the tracks didn't look finished, or how the cars were, not up to the detail that they were expecting. I wanted the feedback to be about how did the game drive and how did the game play, and because we were able to do it at such high fidelity, that was the feedback that we received, and we were then able to act on that.
Yeah.
So it was a universal decision. Felt it was the right thing to do, and the way that it was announced and released was also the right thing to do, and it was just a perfect storm.
Yeah. And I guess, back to the idea of magic in a bottle, perfect storm. Valve have built a system in Steam that allowed you to do it, so that kind of the time was right. You would talk to Valve, and you had a product you were developing, but it still needed to be prototyped, and you knew that it was you knew there was a market there, so you decided to release it. And
I think the key thing was we didn't know that there was a market there. I sensed there was a market there. Speaking to people on Twitter, I knew that there was enough people shouting about, why don't you make a proper rally game?
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. But I didn't have any user research data to back that up. It was just a gut feeling. But we went for it, and fortunately it turned out to be the right thing to do. With the discussions with Steam and Valve, what we actually got told was that they were increasingly unhappy with companies going and putting stuff on early access and charging inordinate amounts of money up front for a very unfinished game, and then running off into the sunset without ever delivering on their promise. So I think we were one of the first games that Valve kind of put a clamp down on how games were being made, and their new approach was to say you can only sell the game for the amount of content that it has in it. So that's why we turned early access on its head and said, it's $20 up front.
Yeah.
And then we'll incrementally increase the price as we put more content in.
Yeah.
And that was on their advice. And in hindsight, I think it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, our most hardcore fans got the game at its cheapest. And while I think that's a great thing from a community perspective, as a businessman, that was probably not helpful. I think you would want your early adopters to pay the highest price. In the end, I think we ended up doing what I see to be the correct thing as somebody who's not lined their pockets with the success of Dirt Rally.
Yeah.
But from a business perspective, I think it would have been better to make sure that the most committed fans paid the most, because that would have probably ensured a more long-term service on Dirt Rally.
Yes,
and one that I
you
believe
mean.
they are steering towards now for Dirt Rally 2.
Yes, I understand where you're coming from. Now, so Dirt Rally 1.0 basically was a groundbreaker in many ways and has led directly to the forthcoming release of Dirt Rally 2.0 in late February 2019, February 26th, I think it was. And it's funny how you talked about launching a game and you'll have it 6 months later, which is kind of what 2.0 is now. And I've been following some of the development of 2.0, and the chief game designer is Ross Gowing, and you have rally consultants John Armstrong. John, I believe, is from Northern Ireland, the same as Chris Meek, and also Ryan Champion. And if I recall correctly, Ryan has been on the Absolute Rally podcast.
Yeah, he's one of the hosts of it. So Ross is somebody who I've worked with at various points in my career. He used to live on the same street as me back in Leamington Spa. I was the best man at his wedding, so we go back a long time, and we are good friends. But the only thing that we don't have in common is that he supports Norwich City and I support Ipswich Town. So that's where we have to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
But Ross is an incredible game designer, and one who has been as passionate as I've been with racing games throughout his career. He's also gone off and developed his own game on mobile. He's also worked in a much broader spectrum of studios, including making Guitar Hero Live. So he has probably a more diverse game-making background than I could ever hope to have. And so he brings a lot of experience to the table in terms of running a good service and making games that transcend racing rather than just being pigeonholed in the racing genre. So he's a great fit, and I want to say I groomed him for the role, because I certainly didn't, but he was the obvious choice to take on the responsibility of leading the game design for Dirt. John Armstrong and Ryan. So we actually spoke with Ryan and used Ryan as a consultant a little bit on Dirt Rally 1, but it wasn't in any official capacity. He just came in to try the handling, I think once. Just because he was down in Banbury with his Impreza, and he popped in on his way back. But he gave us some really interesting insight. And then when we were looking to recapture the magic of Dirt Rally with Dirt Rally 2, he was one of the first people we got in to try and help our simulation team find the feeling that we were looking for, bearing in mind that we've completely reworked how the simulation worked through the course of Dirt 4, and improved it all over the place. But that didn't mean that we necessarily had the feeling. It's just they were improvements in the way that we were doing things. So he was the first person that helped us with that. And then when I announced to Codemasters that I was going to be moving on, one of the things that I was very keen to do was to make sure that didn't mean that Dirt Rally 2 couldn't be finished, if that makes sense. I realise that sounds a bit of an overly modest thing to say, but it was very important to me that all the effort, the blood, sweat and tears that I and others around me had poured into making Dirt a successful franchise, making Dirt Rally specifically a successful part of that franchise, didn't get lost because I was moving off to take on a new opportunity. So Johnny was somebody who I'd spoken to again on Twitter. It's kind of my Rolodex for getting people working on the game or
Yeah.
getting their feedback on the game. But Johnny was looking for drives in rallying, but wasn't having as much luck as I think his talent deserved.
Yeah.
So I worked with our executive producer to see if we could work out a way of getting him involved with the game as somebody who's got real world competitive rally experience at a level to which you wouldn't normally be able to get somebody to consult for the time that he's able to consult for. So he's moved over from Northern Ireland. He's got himself a flat nearby. He's moved over with his partner, and he's working on Dirt Rally, full time.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But not just on is the handling any good, because that's something that is quite subjective. And I think if we were to make it to a fully professional rally driver's level, it would be amazing, but I think it would also make it more challenging to sell at the amounts that it needed to sell to. So while he is used on a daily basis for that, he also brings all of his experience of competition, of how rally events work and feel, and what it's like to be on stage, and why it's important for certain things to be represented in the way that they do. And that's all the stuff that I was able to do, having sat in the car and competed at a national level. He's continuing that side of things as well. So Ross, John, and Ryan have all contributed a great deal, and all they are doing is ensuring that the incredibly talented people who already work in that studio have the answers to the questions they need to answer to ensure that they are making the best, most appropriate rally experience that they can with the tools that they have available. And so, yeah, it's, I feel like it's been left in good hands. I feel a bit like a proud parent that's kind of watched their kid graduate and is now off in the big wide world, getting a job, getting a girlfriend, getting a car, doing all of that stuff. And it's been weird for me watching it from the sidelines, but I'm enormously proud of what the team have done and how well they've done it. And obviously that's just on what I'm seeing at the moment, but I can't wait to play it and experience it firsthand, because it's cool seeing tracks and cars that we'd chosen while I was still there, but I'd only seen them at a sort of super early prototype phase, now being finished to a point where they can put them into the marketing assets. So the Argentina track, the New Zealand track, the Canadian rallycross track, they're all completely incredible compared to the state that I saw them in when I left in June. So it's been super cool to see it all pan out. And yeah, it does pull at the heartstrings a little bit. There are times when I do wish I was still able to be part of it.
I can imagine.
But sometimes you just have to kind of let this stuff go and know that other people are going to do new and exciting and cool things with it, and hopefully things that are going to be cooler than I could have ever done.
And it's funny because thinking about the selection of cars, and the feeling I got from Dirt Rally 1.0 is that every single car that was represented in that game was there for a reason. They were representing of the period, representing of the class, and as you said, they were built to high detail, and that was a focus, I think, that people kind of noticed. So Paul, you were involved in 2.0 up until a year or so before you left. So what was your role, if you can talk about your role in 2.0 before you left? Were you the chief designer, or what exactly had you been doing on 2.0?
Yeah, until I left, I was chief designer, and I handed over to in the last couple of weeks, and he's taken on that role now, and is doing a great job with it from everything that I've seen. So what I did was essentially help shape the track and car selection, steer the direction, to try and get back to recapturing the feeling of Dirt Rally 2. And then a lot of it was getting the guys that we talked about, the consultants that we talked about, in and working on it, so that we could confidently say that we were representing Rally in the best way possible. And there's a whole chunk of stuff that they're layering in that, you know, is, if done properly, is going to make it way better than Dirt Rally 1 ever could have been, which is things like the surface degradation,
Yes.
the fact that road position will now make a difference, tire choice, all of those things that,
yes, that
a
people
lot
were
of our
asking
fans
for.
have been crying out for.
Yeah.
So those are the sorts of things that I was asking for, and now the team have actually delivered on those requests. I think it's going to be in a good place, and I'm excited to see what the long-term plan is for it, because the thing that I wish we'd been able to do with Dirt Rally 1 was to just continue servicing it and building up a calendar of events to the point where you did have a full championship there ready to go, and each country did have lots of unique stages available for it. And you know, hopefully this is the chance for Dirt Rally to actually see that more long-term future, and for players to be taken on a much longer journey than one through early access.
I didn't actually play. I have to admit, I never bought a copy of Dirt 4. Have you played Dirt 4? Were you involved in development of Dirt 4 in any way? Or
Yeah. I mean, straight after Dirt Rally, I was involved with Dirt 4, and I was by title the chief game designer on Dirt 4, and there was a lot of stuff with Dirt 4 that was actually designed in because there were things that we couldn't do for Dirt Rally. And one of the things that was probably the most exciting things about it was the track generator, stage generator,
your
because
stage technology.
So that on paper was the perfect solution to a rally game, because rally is all about not knowing what's around the next corner and having to listen to your co-driver. And so your stage was our attempt at that solution. And I think still, in theory, it is the perfect solution to a rally game. And I've seen it actually in working firsthand, and that was like when we did the esports competition for Dirt 4. The drivers had never seen the rally stage that they got to play, so they were genuinely competing on a new track because they'd never played it before. They'd experienced the corners as part of the system, but they'd never seen it in that order before. And it was a big separator between the guys that just sat there and practiced time and time again, and the guys who were just naturally gifted at controlling a car around. So I hope that this isn't the end for your stage, and that there is an opportunity to develop it out further in the future. But it was incredibly expensive, and the results were not as, I guess, as excellent as we'd hoped they would be. Because, you know, the way that it was made was again, incredible technology, but I just think it needs to put a bit more of the burden on the hardware and a bit less on the people making the stages. Because essentially what we were asking our level designers and artists to do was to make 5 times as much track for half the amount of uniqueness, or even a quarter. So the effort involved was far too much on the production of it rather than on the hardware. If you could genuinely make it procedural and have the tracks built in the software by the hardware, then I think it would be a much better solution. And then it would be up to players to generate until they find stages that they loved, and then be able to save and share them, rather than it just being how many different ways can you make the Scalextrics track work.
And I guess it's a form of, as you guys were doing with Dirt Rally and so on, it was a form of breaking the mold and trying something new and thinking, and indeed people who played Dirt Rally 1.0 and loved Dirt Rally 1.0 were crying out for more tracks. I mean, I even now, I have to come back to Dirt Rally because I've been doing other things. But if I was to drive the Sweet Lamb or Grease, or I just know all the corners, and in reverse, so to speak. And I guess the Your Stage technology was trying to address that in an interesting way. But is it so that in 2.0 the tracks are bespoke? Did the guys go out and do a recce and take photographs? I mean, like you did with the Col de Torini in Monaco that you have in Dirt Rally 1.0. That's pretty much as the track is, isn't it so?
Yeah, I mean, wherever possible, we do go out. If not, then we send out to do the capture for us, and then we represent the stretches of road as closely as possible.
Yep.
So there are always differences. Some of that is born out of necessity, and some of that is born out of design. But yeah, it's what making bespoke tracks allows you to do is create sections of road that are very well crafted to ensure that the player gets the best challenge out of those sections of road. With a procedural system, you end up needing to compromise how crafted sections are, because the more crafted they are, the more recognizable they are. Obviously, you're driving down the same piece of road again. So there are pros and cons to both. I think where we were for Dirt Rally 2 when I left, it was far more sensible to be doing bespoke stages and making them the best rally stages that had ever been seen in any video game, than it was to try and hope that the procedural stuff could suddenly become that much better, because I don't think the leap forward that it would have needed would have been feasible in the time that we had available. But maybe, and I this is just speaking completely hypothetically now, maybe when the hardware gets better, the opportunity to do more interesting things with a procedural system will become available.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, and I guess Your Stage 2.0, so to speak, if I can put it that way. So, Paul, you're now moving on to the future and current. You're now the creative director at Nordeus Mobile Games, and you're based in Belgrade in Serbia. So, would you like to discuss your role there? I'm interested to see your role there, and how did this role in Serbia come about, might I ask?
So it came about because a friend of mine who was the art director while I was while we were prototyping Dirt, which then became Dirt Rally, got an opportunity to come out here and started last September. And he had a lot of positive things to say about the company, the philosophy, the people that are working there. And so I was like, okay, yeah, well, I'll see. And, at the time I wasn't in a particularly good place back in the UK. My wife was not very well, and we weren't particularly happy with how things were going in politics and stuff. So we were feeling a little bit uncomfortable with life there. It wasn't really somewhere where I wanted my son to, or where we wanted our son to be growing up, certainly in the short term. So, we were interested in options, and I went along and chatted with them. And the amazing thing about Nordeus is that the company is built around a game that they made 8 years ago. They released a game on Facebook called Top 11, which is a football management game.
Yes.
It's since been released on mobile and on other platforms, but it's just a really good football management game, but one that makes them a lot of money.
Yeah. And
these guys could have just ridden off into the sunset. The four guys that made it originally, the founders, they could have just ridden off into the sunset, bought super yachts and retired at the age of 28. But what they actually decided to do was build a video game industry in their home country, and develop a company that has an incredible philosophy. They're super philanthropic, so they provide life saving equipment to local hospitals. They support charities wherever possible in the local area.
Yeah.
They're working with universities to help further the education, to make sure that kids that are graduating have an opportunity to come and work in games.
Yeah.
So the reason I was excited by it was because of the incredible positivity that surrounded the founders and therefore the company that they formed. The fact that they were looking forward and not backward, and the fact that Serbia as a country has been kind of somewhat held back in terms of the wider world, but it is now growing. It's a country that is showing huge potential, and yes, as with all countries that aren't or haven't been as free to develop as others, they have things that are still a little bit backward.
Yeah.
But the positivity around all the stuff that is growing is so far outweighs any of the negative stuff that my wife and I sort of looked at the opportunity and figured it was absolutely the right thing for us to do. Mostly because if we didn't want to be sat there in 3 years' time in the UK and regretting the choices that we'd made. So we kind of shoved all of our stuff in a truck and came over. What I am doing at Nordeus, I can't speak about project specifics, but one of the key things I'm trying to help them with is helping them grow design and creativity within the company, and I'm doing that hand in hand. Harvey, who's my art director, who I worked with before, and it's essentially because Nordeus is a company that's kind of founded on engineering and engineering principles. They've got incredible engineers there. Engineers being another term for programmers.
Yeah.
But they didn't really have the sort of design leadership and art leadership that you need to have that perfect kind of scenario of making great games.
Yeah.
Because you can have all the programmers in the world, but without some vision being held and without some art to wrap around it, it's always going to fall short compared to the whole kind of shebang. So yeah, we're out here to help from a perspective with that, but also to make great successful games that will hopefully continue to grow Nordeus and make it even bigger and become this kind of hub for games development over in Eastern Europe, that will hopefully be of huge appeal to people all around the world. I mean, there's plenty of places I can think of where people now go and work because they are hubs for that sort of industry, and we see there being a great opportunity to do that here. So it's some of it was related around families, furthering my journey through my career and looking at it from, okay, it's not that I felt like I was done with rally or I was done with the genre. I still feel like there's stuff that I haven't done that I'd love to do in rally as a genre, but in terms of career development and taking my career to the next level and using my experience and knowledge to help grow other people's careers, it was an incredible opportunity. And as a company, Nordeus really look after their staff. It's so 3 examples that I can give you of things that have been very different for me. One, I get breakfast and lunch just given, that like on hand. They've got a cafeteria, so I don't have to worry about feeding myself throughout the day. So all of that's really cool. 2, they do this thing where you don't have a holiday restriction. So if I needed to, I could take as much holiday as I wanted to. That's not to say that I'm going to do that, but they don't have you've only got 5 days left. That's not a thing. So it's up to you to sort of self-manage your time and therefore the effort that you're putting in.
Yeah, interesting.
But what that leads to is a sense of like, well, I'm going to work as hard as I can when I am at work, and then I know that I can take whatever time be with my family when I need to.
Yeah.
And then the third thing that they do, which is amazing, is they take the whole company, so that's 150 people, for a week to it's team building basically.
Yeah.
But it, like, we went to a Greek island, Poros, for 5 days, and basically in a hotel by the beach, just getting to chill out, hang out, meet people from within the never have met if I hadn't have been at the beach with them. But just everybody gets the chance to chill out, stress, like de-stress. But what it means is when you go back to work, everyone's up working again and super excited to get back and do great things. So they've just got this really positive approach, and it all stems from leadership and the founders being incredibly generous with the money that they've made from their incredibly successful game, and wanting to grow something from it rather than just wanting to become richer. So yeah, it's a super cool place to work. Serbia is an amazing country. Everyone thinks it's really cold, but it's still 25 degrees out here.
Yeah.
It will get cold in the winter, but it's like winter is short and harsh.
Yeah.
But then you get between 25 and 40 degrees for the rest of the year, so it's nice and warm.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're having a great time out here.
Yeah, I was in that part of the world with the family during the summer. I was north of you. I was in Slovakia. I was in the east of Slovakia. I have some very good friends here. And I guess it's like a hub. It's like what Supercell are, for example, doing here in Finland. And indeed what like Rimac are doing in Croatia. They have there's a good series I'll link to in the video description about Rimac, the auto technology company who want to develop their own electric car, but they've been making components for Aston Martin and Koenigsegg, and they got investment from the Middle East, and the guy wanted them to move out. The investors wanted them to move, and he said, no, I want to keep it here in Croatia, and that's what they're doing, and so they can kind of feedback. So one question is there a single element of way of working that you had that you liked at Codemasters working on the Dirt games that you've brought to Serbia to teach at Nordeus? Is there a kind of a methodology, or is there one thing you could put your finger on that you maybe learned at Codemasters or developed at Codemasters that you've brought to Nordeus that helps them in the way how they work?
So yes and no. I think yes. I've experienced a lot of different ways of working. Even in my time at Cody's, there were a lot of different fees applied to development, be it from the traditional old school waterfall where you finish a task and then you move on to the next task, all the way through to perceived agile, although I never think it was truly agile. The key thing that I like to do from a design perspective is to make sure that the documentation is as lightweight as it can be, while providing as much information as is needed, rather than massively over documenting stuff and then people not reading it, or not providing enough information and people not being able to quickly and effectively make the thing that you need them to make. So that's all stuff that I'm trying to bring over, but it's all in a very different context now. The way mobile games get made is far more rapid. There's much less upfront investment, certainly from a game side. So there are things that I would have considered absolutely part of my essential toolkit, which I've left at the door. The other things that I was particularly, I guess, versed at from working at Codes, I'm not going to say skilled at, because I don't believe I'm particularly skilled at anything, but it's knowing what feels right. And that's something that you can only really get once you've felt something good and then you've seen it carry through into being successful. And there's only 4 people at Nordeus that really have that. So up until last week, I hadn't had that moment. And then this last week we had it, and I had to sit the team down and I was like, this is what it feels like. And you might not know this now, but remember this moment, because in however many months' time, when we're all wondering about whether this was the right thing to do, just remember this day, because it was one of those kind of pivotal moments where you're like, actually, this is really cool. We should continue on this path. So it's just being there to share what that feels like to people who haven't felt that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, a learning experience on both sides, and you've been there only a relatively short while, since June. But is there anything, if you were to return to Codemasters someday, is there anything you've learned at Nordeus that you would take back with you to the UK?
I'd certainly recommend that they take the company away 5-day team on a Greek island, but I'm not sure whether that's something. Just I think a lot of it comes from how well you can treat people. And it doesn't necessarily need to be about money to do that. No. The money definitely helps. Being able to feed people, being able to provide them with whatever support they need. A lot of that is financial, but some of it just comes from, making the call. And it obviously becomes harder when he's bigger, but there's no reason why you can't do some of the stuff. And I know that, this isn't to say that Cody's was like bad at this stuff. They have been through tough times, and they've managed to keep things running. Indeed, and they've only done that through careful management of resources. And when things start to get better, around about the time that Dirt Rally came out and the Formula One's games started doing well again, they did do things to improve the work-life balance, and it did feel like a better place to work. So sure, there's always things you learn wherever you go in life and at work. And if I was ever to learn, whether they'd have me back or not, I don't know. But if I was, of course, there's stuff that I would be keen to bring back and use to the benefit of everyone. But right now, my life is here, my family are here, my work is here, and I'm actually looking forward to playing a dirt game that I didn't have to work on all the way through to completion, to pick it up and play it out the box and experience it firsthand, because I haven't done that since 2004.
No, since your college days. So looking at it from the other side of the fence, so to speak. So a final point, and we'll close. Paul, are you still active in rally and co-driving, and have you been able to do something in Serbia, or do you need to travel back to the UK to possibly compete with Jon or whoever? And are you still currently following the WRC, and what are your thoughts on how rally is now?
So I am, but probably not as avidly as I did when I was working on it. In Serbia, I certainly haven't got a gig driving out here. My current license situation is that I think I'm one race away from being able to apply for my international license back in the UK, which would then allow me to co-drive over here. But I still need to do that one event, and that will almost entirely be on Jon to get the car ready and say when he wants to do another event, because Luke Harvey, who I also did some co-driving with, another community member from the Dirt days, he's sold it. So we went off and did we did a single venue, and then we did a stage rally, and the stage rally we knackered the car and it never really recovered from it, just by virtue of the fact that it was a gravel rally, and that's not always conducive to a Peugeot 106 and how it holds together. So Jon's kind of my only hope right now, and that will hopefully, with a race finish, open the door to being able to do my bars test and get the international license, and then maybe we can talk about doing an event in Serbia. But I do need to check them out, because they feel like they're quite kind of Italian tarmac style events here, so quite windy mountain roads, which will be fun to do. It just won't be rallying in the way that I know it, sliding around on the gravel.
Is there an active rally scene there? In that part of the world?
I wouldn't go as far as saying massively active. They've kind of blended rally and hill climb over here. a little bit, and because it's like the Balkans are made up of a lot of different states, there's like I think there's a Balkan Championship where they visit all of the different countries within the Balkans. I know that there is a Belgrade rally in May, so I'm definitely going to check that out. And then I think, yeah, the trouble is it all sounds so close, but there's a rally in Sofia, I think.
Yeah.
And it was this weekend, and I looked at it, and it was like a 6 to get there. So I was like, oh, it's right next door. And then I looked at Google Maps, and it was like, actually, that's going to take 6 hours to get there. So I think I need to do the logistic planning a little bit better and go from there.
And have you been? I have to admit, I've kind of fallen behind on the current WRC, and so I took up WRC Plus, which I can recommend to people. By the way, it's a great service, and I've saw that Sebastian Loeb is back, at least as far as I have gotten in this year's season, and indeed I see that Sebastian Ogier has signed to do Citroën, I think, in 2019. So have you been following the current WRC championship, and what's your feeling on that right now?
So I have been keeping one eye on it. I know that results have gone pretty well for Ogier today, but I think he's still a little bit off being able to beat Neuville. I haven't actually seen the updated championship results, but yeah, I mean, what's cool about this and actually last season to a certain extent is the fact that there isn't that clear runaway winner, and it's something that when VW were running and when Loeb was running with Citroën,
yes,
there was always that like, well, it's only going to be a matter of how much they're going to win by rather than if they're going to. Whereas it seems like Toyota, Ford, and Hyundai are all there or thereabouts. Citroën probably a little bit further back, although that may well change with Ogier moving there next year. But yeah, I mean, it's more interesting, but then it's less easy to be able to watch. You have to really proactively seek it out. Fortunately, I still get Motorsport TV here, so I can watch like highlight package stuff in English. So that I do still get my fill of WRC and rallycross and the rest. But yeah, what I'd hoped was with a more interesting championship race, it would actually inspire me to watch it a bit more. But I find the way that they cover it just makes it a little bit tougher to actually enjoy. So I've struggled a little bit in that regard. But yeah, we'll see. I think how this year goes with obviously Spain and Australia left to go will be interesting in terms of how exciting it can be for the future.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting times. And I think perhaps inadvertently in a way the removal or Volkswagen's pulling out, shall we say, was a good thing for the sport in a way, because it meant that Ogier moved to Ford and M Sport, and then it kind of shook up the things a bit and made it perhaps even more interesting to watch. So because it had been a kind of a one horse race, so to speak, with and even from watching the earlier stages like Monaco and Sweden, so you can see I could see already the frustration in Ogier's voice, that he's kind of still trying to achieve that. He has this drive to win, but it's not happening. And then Thierry Neuville having issues in Mexico, and in that way I've been following other sports. I've been playing other simulators, just set a course and R Factor, and I'd been looking at GT races and so on, and races of a certain format, sprint races, endurance races, because I've from starting with learning, and I will say directly from you about rally and then about motoring, I've learned so much more. And when I come back to rally again, it's so fresh, it's just so different, because it's the stages can be so brutal. It's a different form. It's still motorsport, and the technologies are the same. And I think it's fair to say I understand so much more. But to come back to it now, I find it interesting to watch because it's so different, isn't it?
Yeah, it's I think when you have an appreciation of what it's like on stage, it's more interesting to watch.
Yeah.
I think, and it's similar to sports like cricket, for example, where if you've played cricket, you kind of get the rules, you kind of understand the ebb and the flow of the game, and therefore it becomes a bit more like you can kind of feel what the players are going through, and you understand how the game is progressing, and that is definitely of benefit with rally, especially now that although they're quicker, they're probably less exciting to watch. Some of the footage that you used to see of McRae and Sainz and co throwing cars through stages in the Group A were just unbelievable. And that notion of throwing a car sideways is the quick way has been somewhat lost with the way the technology has advanced. So the actual act of the car going down the stage is perhaps a little less interesting to watch. So I think it then becomes
that's a good point.
Being able to know how skilled that driver is being in order to keep the car on the road, that then becomes like actually this is interesting because he is doing a great job, or you can spot when a driver's really pushing.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of nuance that comes across. However, how do you get people who haven't experienced driving a rally car, even in the virtual world, interested in watching rallying as a spectator sport? It's a really tough ask. And it's where rallycross has this perfect sort of format, because it's short, sharp races. They're always high energy and full of action. And the only slight challenge with rallycross is how challenging the event format can be to understand. So this notion of getting points for your position in the qualifying rounds, and how those points then convert to championship points at the halfway point, and then you go into the semi-final and final knockout, and that's what becomes complicated about it. But the racing itself, on face value, is incredible.
Yeah, and like you said, this heat-based concept, and then the Joker and so on, and it takes a while to kind of get into it. And indeed, it takes a while to get into the rally as well. And I can see like Tanak seems to be an upcoming star, and I'd like to see Thierry Neuville and Tanak, for example, do well someday. And it's interesting to see. And you do, after a while, you get to know the faces and the personalities, in particular, like when Tanak this year had moved from M Sport Ford over to Toyota. Paul, it's been wonderful to hear your voice, and I'm glad to hear that you're doing well. And congratulations on the new role, by the way, and the move to Serbia. It sounds like you're doing well, and it's been a positive move overall. And I want to thank you for joining the show, because, as I said in the beginning, the Dirt Rally was kind of the inspiration for me to get a wheel and go from there. And from that, I moved on to other things, and I tried to keep in contact with you in between. And then when they started tweeting 2.0 last week, it kind of brought it all back, so to speak. And I messaged you, and then you were like, well, I'm not there anymore. And I was thinking, oh, you moron, I should have, of course, checked your profile. And then I realized you're with Nordeus in Belgrade, and I'm thinking, hold on, what's this is all about? Because this is even more interesting, the fact that you've moved, so it's great to hear your voice. Hopefully Lee Williams will have a listen in, and the guys back in Cody's, and it's great to hear that you're doing well and enjoying what you're doing, first and foremost, and that's what you seem to be doing. And thanks very much for joining.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure talking.
This audio podcast is available on YouTube, iTunes and Google Play, or you can download and listen to an MP3 audio file from my website, or add the RSS feed to your podcast player. If you're listening to the podcast on iTunes, I would appreciate a rating and a review. And on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell icon. If you enjoy an episode, a like is always welcome, as are any comments or questions you may have, which you can add in the comment section below each episode. Thank you.
Cheers. Although, if people don't like, they're going straight down into Davy Jones's locker, so they better click the like button. Is that the outro music? Do 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 do.